because, frankly, whatever benefits arise from it are very much outweighed by the downsides. It brings out the worst of our natures, including misogyny, which is plain for all to see. It hasn't made us happier. It hasn't made us more connected. It hasn't made us better informed. It's divided us. It's made us conspiratorial, and it's made us vicious and nasty to each other. Burn it down, I say.
Well, on that cheerful note, Anita, it's really nice having you on the program. So thank you for sharing your opinions with us and what you've been going through.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, that is Whamira Porirua, Anita Baker there. Now, Mike is a farmer. He is an arable farmer in mid-Canterbury. For 30 years, I have a natural caution and was lucky to never suffer a serious injury whilst farming. But boy, I came close a few times. Looking back, every one of those instances involved fatigue, often overlooked, which was what Al was talking about, wasn't it? All the accidents happen after 3 p.m. Tiredness. Anyways, a couple of minutes away, action of 4 to 5, the panel, and on a final enlightened note, a group of geese. They're causing disruption near Rotorua's lakefront, holding up traffic and defecating on footpaths. This from RNZ's Felix Damaris, a local democracy reporter. A gaggle of about 11 geese have taken up part-time residence near Rotorua's lakefront, and that no one wants to take responsibility, says one business owner. Herb Christopher of the Dock says it never had and never will have responsibility for domestic geese. It's not a native species. And Bay of Plenty Regional Council Biosecurity Manager Greg Corbett said common domestic geese are not classified as a pest under their management plan. Oh, where to turn, Liam? What to do?
Great! What a great loophole for the geese. They've got impunity. Oh, they've got a good lawyer. I should find out who their lawyer is and hire him.
Yes, the common scenario of an urban animal. We had chickens in Titirangi, Sue. I don't know if you were aware of that.
I knew about the chickens in Albany.
There's chickens there.
Much loved chickens and roosters in Albany.
What are they doing there?
Oh, they were, many of them in the main drag. That was a feature of the Albany village until a while back.
And what happened to them?
I have no idea, but I hope it was a humane disposition. I mean, what should happen with those geese is someone with a farm or land who likes geese could humanely rehome the geese. I think this would be the best option. Someone will love them.
I offer my parents. Send them to my parents.
Yes, send them to the parents. It's amazing what people get excised about, though, Liam. I mean, things that annoy one in particular areas. But I suppose if they're defecating everywhere, it can be a nuisance, can't it?
Oh yeah. Look, we had 2 pet ducks that my wife got, and I knew when she bought them what was going to happen. And like our backyard, you couldn't go out there, and so we took them out to the farm. We put them on the duck pond out there. My son looked at the Mai and asked me if it was a duck observation platform, and I told him it was, which was not a lie. But they leave everywhere. They leave the leavings everywhere. It's not nice.
All right. Lovely to have you both on. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much to you, Sue Bradford. Nice to see you again. And Liam here, wonderful to hear you as well. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow from 3:45. Checkpoint is next. I'll see you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, New Zealand's COVID count grows. 3 new community cases mean we're on the threshold of another cluster. And 6 old cases are revealed, including the earliest known infection in the country. The Health Minister is here to explain it all. Judith Collins and Jacinda Ardern are all about farmers as they push rural policies on the campaign trail. A judge calls for harsher penalties for toy companies peddling dangerous products. It's been a year since the body of a Canterbury student was discovered weeks after his death. What's changed at university halls? And a new poll gives ACT 9 MPs. Time for some introductions? Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The country now has a second cluster of COVID-19 following today's announcement of 3 new cases. The Ministry of Health says the cases are connected to the man who developed the infection after leaving managed isolation and catching a charter flight from Christchurch to Auckland. It says the 3 new cases are a family group linked to the flight. 63 of the 86 passengers have returned negative tests, while the rest are waiting for results. Epidemiologist Professor Michael Baker says that constitutes a new cluster separate to the existing Auckland one.
Now, if we didn't have this really well-developed testing and contact tracing system in place, this could obviously spark a major outbreak. But the fact that New Zealand now has very good systems means that we can get on top of this quickly.
Epidemiologist Michael Baker. Meanwhile, a previously unknown historical case of COVID-19 has been discovered that was most likely the country's first, a man who had arrived from Italy in February. National's Judith Collins became tearful today while discussing mental health in the farming community. Ms Collins has spent the day campaigning in her hometown of Matamata in Waikato following last night's One News debate. While she reported feeling energised during the face-off, a question about the well-being of farmers prompted an emotional response.
Part of that is actually, this makes me emotional, because as you know, I come from a farm. I look at it and think every farmer and every farmer's family needs to know that that is valuable work. That's the best thing we can do.
Judith Collins. Meanwhile, agriculture was also a focus of the Labour Party's campaigning today, with $50 million promised to help farmers shift to environmentally friendly practices. The High Court in Auckland has heard how a former senior government manager planted a spy camera in an Auckland gym's changing room on at least 4 occasions. The police are appealing the man's discharge without conviction and permanent name suppression. Police have told the court the man caught a naked couple on camera in November 2017, and that may have encouraged him to continue offending. They argue his offending over several weeks was not taken into account by the judge at the time, who appeared to rely on an outdated summary of facts indicating the man only offended once. But the man's lawyer argues that offending 4 times did not necessarily alter the severity of his offending or the level of premeditation. The Reserve Bank is signalling it will bring in more measures before the end of the year to support the economy through the COVID pandemic. It's left its benchmark interest rate at a record low 0.25% and reaffirmed its $100 billion bond buying program that says extra help will probably be needed. Here's business editor Giles Beckford.
The central bank says the economy still needs all the help it can get, given the uncertain outlook home and abroad. It expects unemployment to rise and more businesses to close as subsidies and support programs come to an end. So it's proposing to lend to banks directly at the cheapest rate possible on condition they on-lend to businesses. That could happen before the end of the year, with negative interest rates probably still to come early next year. This is Giles Beckford.
A man who was abused while in state care is describing it as nothing more than a forerunner to jail. 31-year-old Chassie Duncan spoke to the Royal Commission from the Falkland Islands via an audiovisual link. Mr Duncan was 10 years old when taken into care and over the next few years spent time in various boys' homes. He says state care and the violence that went with it was a training ground for prison.
I guess it made me a bit institutionalised at place. In my thoughts and my behaviours, the way I reacted to people was never really the same again after that. And I don't think I was out of residence long before I went into jail.
Chassie Duncan doesn't believe much has changed in state care. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Argentina coach Mario Ledesma is confident his COVID-19 ravaged side will recover in time for November's rugby championship on Australia, although they'll be rusty. More than a dozen players and staff, including Ledesma, have tested positive for coronavirus in the last few weeks. He has told the Sydney Morning Herald almost all had been asymptomatic, and the testing regime in place meant he was sure they'd travel to Australia next month. month. He says while they've been able to train, many haven't played since March, and that will affect their performances. Meanwhile, Michael Hooper will lead the Wallabies out for his 100th test next month after new Australia coach Dave Rennie reappointed him as skipper. Hooper's held the position since 2014. The Wallabies play the All Blacks in Wellington next month. The New Zealand golfer Danny Lee has apologised for his meltdown at the end of the third round of the US Open at the weekend. Lee six-putted from 4 feet on the 18th green to card an 8 over par 78. A visibly angry Lee then smashed his putter into his club bag before promptly withdrawing from the major, citing a wrist injury. Lee says his behaviour was foolish and unprofessional. The Denver Nuggets have played their way back into the Western Conference NBA basketball finals with a 114-106 win over the Los Angeles Lakers to record their first win in the best-of-7 series, which the Lakers now lead 2-1. That's the news.
Queenstown's finance debate gets heated.
We made a mistake, we fixed it. It makes no difference to any of our policies.
Paul, your plan doesn't add up.
A night of politics in the Bay of Plenty.
We need to be taxing houses. Why is houses the only thing not taxed in this country?
And the first televised debate divides viewers.
Primary school teachers, they're not the rich, they're not the wealthy, they need a break.
Covering all sides. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now, the short forecast for a Met Service till midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mostly fine, however, cloud increasing tonight with a few showers, rain developing tomorrow. Wide Tomo to Kapiti Coast, including central high country. Showers turning to rain, heavy about the Tararua Range and Mount Taranaki tonight and elsewhere tomorrow. Rain easing from the south tomorrow and clearing in Wellington. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloud increasing, patchy rain from tonight. Wellington, Wairarapa, Nelson and Marlborough, scattered rain, widespread and heavy about the Tararua Range, clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Norwesterly gales, severe gales for a time today in Wellington, Wairarapa and the Marlborough Sounds. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine spells, evening showers near the coast, possibly heavy, and again tomorrow in Southland. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, showers turning to rain with thunderstorms about Fiordland tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with showers tonight. RNZ National, it's 5:07.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. We're in our gummies on the farm. Coming up as both Labour and National focus on the rural sector. But we begin tonight with COVID-19 and revelations that New Zealand's first infection was actually a week earlier than previously thought. The Ministry of Health originally recorded our first case of the virus as a returned traveller from Iran back on February 28th. But today it revealed the virus was actually in the community a week earlier on February 21st. The new index case has come about after a Waikato family was visited by a family member from Italy. The visitor was sick and 5 members of the household became ill shortly after. But none were tested because Italy wasn't a country of concern at the time. The case has only come to light after a male member of the household recently had a sore throat, got a COVID test and produced what's called a weak positive result, indicating an old infection. That means 6 old cases were added to New Zealand's COVID-19 tally, along with 3 new community cases from today. Those cases are all linked to a man who had left managed isolation in Christchurch after a flight from India via Fiji on August 26. That man flew to Auckland from Christchurch on September 11th and tested positive 5 days later, despite 2 previous negative tests on day 3 and day 12. Now, we wanted to talk with the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, about all of this tonight, but he declined to be interviewed. But joining us now is the Health Minister, Chris Hipkins. Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
So the government has repeatedly told us that we went hard and we went early, but isn't it now apparent we actually didn't go early enough?
Oh, no, I don't think that's a fair conclusion to make. I think, we've always known that there were cases out there that went undetected in the early part of our dealing with the our response to COVID-19. That's not unusual. Other countries are in exactly the same position. People did what we asked them to do, which is that they stayed home. They got better and they never got tested. And clearly.
But that's not quite how it worked, is it, Minister? Because they were symptomatic in Waikato and couldn't get tested in mid-February. They'd had a direct link to overseas travel, but kind of didn't marry up with the testing criteria at the time. So is that good enough?
Look, I think it's probably frustrating. I think at the time the testing criteria at that early phase could have been more liberal, and certainly much more liberal now, and has been for quite a long time. I think it probably could have been more liberal in the beginning.
So you should have gone wider with your testing regime from the start?
No, the testing regime was established based on the clinical guidance at the time. So it was medical professionals. They issued the guidance on who should and shouldn't be tested. And obviously, at the time, people coming from Italy, if there hadn't been, the big outbreak in Italy at that point, that there subsequently was. And so it wasn't included in the testing criteria.
This is a complicated web, so I want to break a few bits of it down, so do bear with me. So to be clear, the 6, which are old cases, 1 is a traveller who came from Italy and is infected. Did they go back to Italy?
Yes, my understanding is that they are back in Italy, yes.
Right, so the other 5 are people who live here permanently.
Yes, that's correct, yep.
So how do we know for sure that traveller who returned to Italy was actually infected with COVID-19?
My understanding is that serology testing has been done in Italy for that person who travelled to New Zealand, and that serology testing completed in Italy has been shared with New Zealand. My understanding is that serology testing was done in July, but the issue was that the sort of, if you like, the weak positive cases have caused all of these things to be linked up since then.
So if that testing was done in July, when did the man with the sore throat raise the alarm, in essence?
Well, it wouldn't necessarily raise the alarm because someone being tested in July and the serology testing, the people who did that in Italy would have identified that the infection had been in February, that it was a recovered infection. So there would be no need to contact trace recent contacts because they would be historic. So,
Understand that, Minister, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm just trying to make this as clear as possible. Did that person who went home to Italy and later had testing that suggested they had been infected not bother to contact the family that they visited here in New Zealand and inform them of the fact that they may have been infected at the time they were visiting?
Oh, look, I don't have the level of detail about the conversations that they may have had with the family. The family, one person from the family got a test last week, and that's what's alerted us now to these historic cases.
Okay, so the 5 people you are recording as probable cases, the ones that remain in New Zealand, how do you know that they are likely to have had it, and why not spread the net further? Why is there just 5 people in this group?
Well, my understanding is that they're regarded as probable cases because the interview process identified that they recorded symptoms at about the same time as the person who did have the positive test. Now, testing them won't necessarily tell us anything in those cases. Further testing is still taking place, but it may well be that they come back negative because it was such a long time ago. They're not necessarily going to show up a positive test. In fact, it's unlikely that they'd show up a positive test, and it wouldn't necessarily tell us much.
Understand that. So is it therefore likely that there are other probable cases that you're not recording? Because it has a ripple effect, doesn't it, if they've had contact with people?
Look, there were definitely, absolutely, all of the epidemiologists will tell you this, that during our lockdown, our level 4 and our level 3 lockdown, there were probably quite a significant number of cases of people who stayed home, they got better, and they never got tested. And that could be quite a significant number.
So what work's being done to see how far that infection went or got? Are you trying to track those numbers?
No, we wouldn't be able to do that now. That would be a relatively futile exercise because of the period of time. But if you look at the extensive community testing that we have done, I think we're getting up close to 1 million tests for COVID-19 that we've conducted in New Zealand. If there'd still been COVID out there, so if they'd passed that on to people and there was still a chain of transmission going on that we didn't know about, the extensive testing that we have done would have started to reveal that, and it hasn't.
Okay, so when you get cases like this with a weak positive, for everyone, are you then going back and doing what you've done with this family to identify probable cases and adding them on to our tally?
Yeah, so we go back in any positive case, whether it's a weak positive, a strong positive, we do an investigation, or the Ministry of Health do an investigation, working with public health units to identify as much information as possible that helps with piecing the jigsaw puzzle together. And so that'll include looking at whether serology testing is needed, so that's a blood test to identify, whether it's a historic infection. They'll look at whether there are other people. They'll do an interview process, and that'll help to identify whether there are other people who were symptomatic at the same time. All of those things happen.
Okay, there's a bit more that I want to get through reasonably quickly. So there are 3 community cases linked to a man who flew from Delhi, right? How are they connected to him? Where did they pick it up?
So that's one of the things that's happening at the moment. We're going through to identify exactly what the connections are. So there are some points of connection. So we know through the genome sequencing that it's the same virus, if you like, that's infected these different people. We know that they were on similar flights, or they're on the same flight coming into New Zealand. They were also on the same transfer flight from Christchurch to Auckland after they had been in managed isolation in Christchurch.
So you haven't identified the flight yet that you think the infection occurred on?
No. So it's possible that it was the flight from Christchurch to Auckland, but that would beg the question of how someone positive, having gone through managed isolation and quarantine, came to be on that flight in the first place. So those are all of the things that are being identified now.
Are they strangers to him?
My understanding it's another family group, that they were sitting near to each other on the plane from Christchurch to Auckland, i.e. they were sort of in the same 2 or 3 rows of the plane. And so, my understanding is that they don't necessarily know each other,
right.
but I don't have all of the detailed information about the relationships between all of the different cases here. I know that the most recent cases, the 3 cases today, they're all one family group.
Okay, so 2 or 3 rows away on the internal flight from Christchurch to Auckland. What about from Delhi? Where were they sitting in relation to him?
The public health unit have got that. I don't have that information. I don't have the detailed seat chart for that, but I know that the public health unit will have that information, and they will be going through and identifying, they'll be piecing all of it together, including looking at other people who've been through managed isolation and doing the genomic testing and sequencing for all of the other positive cases that might have come off that flight as well.
I suppose what I'm asking you is how confident you can be that they actually caught it from him and not someone else on that flight.
Well, look, I mean, that is, you have to remain, you've got to keep an open mind in these processes. Sometimes at the beginning, it rings a few alarm bells, and then the pieces of the puzzle slot into place and it becomes less of an issue. But you've got to keep an open mind in the early stages of an investigation. We just can't explain this one quite yet.
So the flight crew who were on board the internal flight from Christchurch to Auckland, did they continue to fly after that?
I don't have that information, sorry.
Isn't that critical?
Look, it absolutely, and the public health unit will have that information, but I don't have that to hand.
Is that all the more reason to tighten up some of the rules around aircrew?
Yeah, we've been working with the airlines on the aircrew regulations. Of course, domestic flights are treated differently to international flights. We do have a pretty rigorous regime around international flights. And there are also requirements around those who are doing those transfer flights as well.
But you are not reviewing it as a consequence of this infection that you're now investigating?
Oh, we review everything, all of the time.
Are you likely to make changes? Are you likely to make changes as a consequence?
Well, one of the things we have to bear in mind is that this was a transfer flight that was transferring people who had completed their isolation back to Auckland. So there shouldn't have been a risk on that flight.
But the point was, isn't it, that there was?
Well, that's right, but they could have easily not been on a chartered flight. They could have been on a regular domestic flight instead. So we're looking at all of those things. We always look at all of those things to make sure that the processes are as robust as possible. But the real question, and the thing we've got to get to the bottom of, and which we're working as quickly as we can to get to the bottom of, is where the point of infection was, how it was that somebody potentially came to leave managed isolation or quarantine, potentially still positive for COVID-19.
Has that group of infection passed the threshold to now be its own cluster?
I don't believe so.
It's pretty close, though, isn't it, Minister?
I don't know what the exact number is that they describe as a cluster, but it's still at this point it's still a small related group of it's still a small related group of cases.
How worried do we need to be then?
I don't think we need to be worried. It looks like everybody in this group at the moment has done exactly what we would ask them to do. They've all been very responsible citizens. They've sought testing. They've complied with the rules and managed isolation. Records would suggest that. So I think they are working very hard to do the right thing and ensure that they're not passing it on to anyone else.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Health Minister, Chris Hipkins. It was all about New Zealand's farmers today as the National and Labour Party leaders hit the campaign trail once again after last night's election debate. The pressure on the rural sector featured strongly in that debate, with National accusing Labour and the Greens of bagging farmers, dairy farmers in particular, for years and contributing to high levels of anxiety and stress. Labour launched a policy making it easier for farmers to navigate new environmental compliance and animal welfare obligations, but denies that's because they were too cumbersome in the first place. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, filed this report.
Oh, hello, Graham. Yes, you have. In fact, it's my parents' lawyer.
Really?
Yeah, one stage. Yeah, yes.
Give your brother John a kiss.
Yes, I saw him just before. Oh, you know my brother
There were
John?
plenty of familiar faces as Nationals leader Judith Collins returned to her hometown of Matamata, clearly energised by the debate.
I really liked it when Miss Ardern said to the media afterwards that she didn't think debating should be a blood sport. Poor wee thing.
During her public meeting, Ms Collins came across another familiar face, Stacey Brown, a farmer who'd asked a question about support for farmers struggling with mental health in last night's debate that she wanted to put to Ms Collins again.
Hey, thank you. I had the opportunity to ask the question last night, but I got some good debate, but I feel that neither of you really answered the question. So my issue was around...
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Rural mental wellness and wellbeing, and it's really relevant because it's mental.
Judith Collins suddenly serious, recalling her own farming background.
I look at it and think every farmer and every farmer's family needs to know that that is valuable work. That's the best thing we can do. I can tell you what, I don't think that farmers are going to listen to people coming along and telling them to feel better.
It's a lot warmer up here.
Yeah, that's what Kevin said. I can walk around in my stubbies all year round, but I guess if you're...
About 100 k's away, Jacinda Ardern pushed back on the accusation Labour has been too hard on the farming sector during her visit to an organic dairy operation in Mangatapiri.
I've always rejected that, just as I've always rejected this idea that they aren't mindful of the environment. They're working the land every day.
She too was reflecting on last night after much commentary that the debate was lacklustre and she herself seemed flat.
No, I felt pretty invigorated out there actually. So no, I didn't feel that way at all. But what I would say is, this is one of four.
And would she take a more assertive approach for those remaining three?
Whatever the nature of those debates are, we'll take them as they come. But ultimately, I went in with an approach that I wanted people to hear our policies, what our plan is, and that's what I did.
The announcement of the day was $50 million to help farmers draw up farm plans to meet new obligations introduced by the coalition. Not an admission they're too burdensome, insists Labour's agriculture spokesperson Damien O'Connor.
No, they're not too onerous. I think that working out how they implement that on each and every farm is something that we can't write from Wellington.
On their way out, a farm manager wanted a quiet word to seek assurances about what would happen in the event of a Labour Greens government.
But if you guys voted going alone, I've got no problems.
Just so you know, now I'm making
If you have a coalition with the Green Party, which it's unknown and you can't make that assumption, can you stick to what you say? You can't.
Yes, but you've already seen what we do in coalition. And we've already had coalitions and we've made that work. And of course, we come through with what our view is on the right thing to do. We form consensus.
Back in Matamata, perhaps the most familiar face Judith Collins bumped into today was her own, tattooed on the leg of local man Nick Given.
And one sitting. And one sitting.
Couple of whiskies.
There had to be a few whiskies to get me through.
We don't give you pain relief. Epidural or something.
This is a competition after all. Will Jacinda Ardern be looking to match the show of political support?
Personally, I would never encourage anyone necessarily to have politicians tattooed on themselves. I feel like that's a risky place to go.
Not a bar that you're hoping to meet?
No, I would never encourage anyone to tattoo me on their person, thigh or anywhere else.
In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It is almost 25 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. 2 companies that imported dangerous toys have been fined a total of $118,000, but one judge says penalties should be much higher. It was the second prosecution for one retailer, prompting some in the industry to call for tougher enforcement. Ruth Hill reports.
The toys may be cheap to buy, but the children whom they harm pay a high price, with some suffering permanent brain damage after choking on tiny parts. And the Commerce Commission is warning people selling unsafe toys should be aware they could be liable for big fines. SDL Trading Limited was fined $64,000 in the Auckland District Court for selling a toy fire engine that was a choking hazard. It was SDL's second such prosecution, after being fined $81,000 in March 2018. In fining Green Star Holdings Limited $54,000 in the Manukau District Court for selling unsafe squeaker toys, Judge Blackie said he would like to see substantially higher penalties. In his sentencing notes, he said the sentences being imposed are not sending the message to importers, distributors and retailers.
It is the very young children that are at risk. They do not have the ability to assess a hazard or potential hazard, as does an older person. A number of traders, as is illustrated by the cases referred to, have been profiting from the distribution of these goods.
The Commerce Commission Chair, Anna Rawlings, says the cases show traders can't simply avoid their obligations by putting warning labels on such toys, which are clearly meant for young children.
Importers and retailers cannot rely on a label that simply says that a toy is not suitable for 3 years and under. It's the nature of the toy that really counts and not the label.
The Commerce Commission has carried out 22 prosecutions since January 2017 relating to toys or other products for kids, with fines totalling just over $1.4 million. Ms Rawlings says the maximum fine under the legislation is $600,000, but fines usually sit around $100,000.
So there is scope for fines to increase, and we did agree with the Commerce Committee when fines were increased in 2014, and we do agree with Judge Blackie that fines need to serve a real deterrence and not simply be a cost of doing business that could harm New Zealand children.
Ms Rawlings says as well as responding to complaints, the Commerce Commission has a team that make between 70 and 100 random visits to retailers a year. There are up to 10 investigations underway at any one time. However, the president of the New Zealand Toy Distributors Association, Jeff Lyons, says enforcement is lagging behind.
The Commission should be taking a lot more stringent action against these people and doing a lot more tests rather than having to wait for someone to say, hey, that toy that I bought doesn't do a standard and it comes from XYZ company. They should be proactive rather than reactive.
The biggest fine for a breach of product safety was $333,000 against the discount store chain 123 Mart in 2017. But Jeff Lyons says such fines are not much of a deterrent if the company goes into liquidation, like 123 Mart.
Well, it doesn't really matter what the level of the fine is if the company's not in a position to pay it or is no longer trading. So it defeats the purpose. I would rather see those companies and their directors or shareholders or whatever it may be somehow banned from importing for a period of 5, 10, whatever it is, years, so that they can't repeat.
Dr Jonathan Webber from the New Zealand Resuscitation Council says toys can pose many hazards to young children, from button batteries to choking.
It's important that people know what to do, in the event that they are confronted with that situation. But of course, prevention is the best medicine for any particular injury or illness. So if we can actually, restrict these dangerous items from getting into the wrong hands and leading to a potentially fatal outcome, then that's going to be a good thing.
ACC figures show between 2014 and 2019 there were at least 39 accident claims relating to choking on toys by children aged 3 and under. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
There's still a lot about COVID-19 we don't know, for example, whether it might trigger some long-term neurological consequences. After the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, there was a big spike in Parkinson's cases, and Australian health experts fear history might be about to repeat itself. The ABC's Penny Timms has more.
Melbourne woman Sheena Buttrell was just 47 when she was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
Well, initially I had difficulty with walking with my left side, so I found that I was limping and I put a lot of pressure on the ball of my foot. It wouldn't necessarily stop me doing things, but I couldn't do it as well.
Now, scientists are investigating whether there may be a looming increased risk of Parkinson's disease caused by COVID-19 triggering an inflammation response in the brain, spinal cord and nerves. If that's the case, Sheena Buttrell says early diagnosis will be key.
For people who have tremors and more difficulties with their movement, I think earlier detection and getting onto treatment early would be much better in the long run.
Professor Kevin Barnum is from the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health in Melbourne. His team is investigating the potential link, and those concerns are outlined in a paper published in today's Journal of Parkinson's Disease.
Parkinson's disease, a very specific part of the brain degenerates. There are a number of different causes. One of the causes is inflammation, and the virus, I think most of us are aware, helps to drive inflammation. Once the inflammation gets into the brain, it starts a cascade of events which can ultimately lead to Parkinson's.
COVID-19 and Parkinson's already share some similar symptoms.
Loss of smell is actually one of the first symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Now, whether the mechanisms are the same, again, that remains to be determined, but certainly the loss of smell is a common symptom in both diseases.
While there's no established link between Parkinson's and COVID-19, researchers point out that 5 years after the Spanish flu, there was a 2 to 3-fold increase in Parkinson's disease. Associate Professor Lindsay Collins-Prado is the head of the Cognition Ageing Laboratory at the University of Adelaide. And while not involved in this study, she agrees a link may exist.
If we knew who was at risk of developing it early, before that brain cell loss becomes catastrophic, it gives us a potential opportunity to intervene to stop the death of those brain cells and to try to protect them.
Even if a connection is proven, it doesn't mean everybody who gets COVID-19 risks developing Parkinson's. But Professor Kevin Barnum says it's important to be alert.
Penny Timms reporting. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, last night's Colmar Brunton poll had ACT at 7%, enough to bring not 1 but 9 MPs into Parliament. So who are they? Well, we'll introduce you. And our travel wings might be clipped, but we tell you why cruising is keen to get back on the itinerary. We would love your feedback about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Do text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
The 3 new cases of COVID-19 announced today indicate there is now a second cluster in the country. The Ministry of Health says the cases are connected to the man who developed the infection after leaving managed isolation and catching a charter flight from Christchurch to Auckland. Epidemiologist Professor Michael Baker says that constitutes a new cluster separate to the existing Auckland one. Meanwhile, the Health Minister Chris Hipkins has told Checkpoint it's too early to call it another COVID cluster. He says the group are linked in that they all flew on the same charter flight, but just how they caught the infection is still unknown. He says they had just completed managed isolation and should not have been at risk to anyone. The Reserve Bank is expecting unemployment to rise and more businesses to close, and it's left its benchmark interest rate unchanged at a record low 0.25. The RBNZ says it will press on with its $100 billion program of buying government bonds, which is keeping a lid on wholesale interest rates and pumping money into the economy. Congestion on Auckland's motorways has been reduced after overnight repairs to the Harbour Bridge allowed for 2 damaged lanes to be reopened. The bridge now has 6 out of its 8 lanes open. The High Court in Auckland has heard how a former senior government manager planted a spy camera in an Auckland gym's changing room on at least 4 occasions. The police are appealing the man's discharge without conviction and permanent name suppression. Police have told the court the man caught a naked couple on camera in November 2017 COVID-19, and that may have encouraged him to continue offending. The Commerce Commission says ignorance is no excuse when it comes to safety standards for toys, as big fines for two importers show. SDL Trading Limited and Green Star Holdings Limited have been fined a total of $118,000 for selling toys with a choking risk for young children. The Commission's chair, Anna Rawlings, says anyone wanting to import goods should know the rules. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuned in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, let's talk about Kathmandu first. So, full year results out, not pretty, but the company still feels optimistic?
Yeah, so this is a company that despite, losing $135 million in sales to the pandemic, they still believe that the pandemic has sort of thrown up a few opportunities for them. So just quickly getting to those numbers, its full year profit evaporated. It was down 88.5% to $8.8 million for the year. That's compared with $56.7 million the year earlier. Its bottom line was affected by the cost of acquiring the surfwear brand Rip Curl. It's got some one-off tax charges and also had an expensive restructure. Its revenue, however, that was up 50% to $801 million, but it's actually a little bit misleading because this year's result does have that new revenue stream they did when they acquired Rip Curl. They didn't have that last year. But I guess what is really interesting with this business is the plans for the future, because maybe it's a bit of a roadmap for lots of other retail businesses out there. And it says that, one of the bright spots for them was that its online sales ticked up 62% and now accounts for about 15% of total sales. And they say that they're going to lean into this. This is going to be part of the company's sort of, plans for growth for the future. And they say one of the things it's got going for it as it enters into the really hyper-competitive online outdoor clothing market is it's got a really strong balance sheet. It's the envy of its competition, who it thinks may not be in the same sort of strong position that it's in. So it's expecting that some of the competitors will fail. They say one of the weird things that the pandemic has thrown up for them has been the fact that these lockdowns have really ignited people's passions for the outdoors. All that time people have spent inside have made them think about all the things they want to do outside, be it camping, hiking, surfing. And if there's one thing we know is that before people try anything new, they tend to go out and buy all the expensive, trendy equipment beforehand. So they expect that this will lead to a bit of a boom in business there. The $1 million question for this company is, I didn't have the pleasure of actually putting this to them, was if they think that online sales will actually begin to replace and become real cornerstone of its business. That's what we need to find out.
Okay. Tell me about this KiwiSaver fund that is pledging to get New Zealand tech startups off the ground with a $50 million investment? Yeah, it's a $50 million pledge, and this is some really big news today for the New Zealand tech sector. This is the KiwiSaver fund manager, Kiwi Wealth. So they've pledged $54 million to this venture capitalist company called Movac 5 Fund. It's a $250 million fund. It's received money from NZ Super, as well as entrepreneurs and iwi, and the apple of this fund's eye is New Zealand tech startups and growth companies. And they're not looking to put money into these companies just out of charity. They actually really believe there's a real opportunity here to invest in companies that won't actually grow and turn a profit, but will deliver something to investors. And we've heard in the past from New Zealanders who've started successful tech startups that one of the things that we have here is we have a lot of knowledge and talent, but the struggle's been getting that money to get the business, really get the ball rolling. So it's been said that there's about a 5% tourism-sized hole in our economy. It's going to be like that for quite some time. So it's actually quite encouraging to hear that there's an initiative out there that it might actually create some meaningful opportunities and hopefully some more jobs out there. Before we move to the markets, just quickly, the RBNZ has left its monetary policy unchanged. Is there anything to look out for in that?
Yeah, so look, as we heard in the news headlines before, the monetary policy is staying the same, OCR staying at where it is. We're not hearing any other complex tools being announced, but the one thing to really pay attention to is that when the members got together today, they said that monetary policy will need to provide significant economic support for a long time to come. You read into that what that probably means, and this is what probably people care about, is that interest rates will remain low and asset prices will continue to go up.
Do you want to bounce from there onto the markets, Nicholas?
Yeah, we'll do. So the NZX Top 50 is up by nearly 1% or 95 points to 11,704. Our dollar is at 66.1 US cents, 92.7 Australian, 51.9 British pence, and in gold it's down below $1,900 as the US dollar gained today.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business news there. 2 years after medicinal cannabis was made legal in Britain, many doctors are still not prescribing it. And although it's early days with only one medical cannabis product approved for use in New Zealand, our GPs appear to be in the same camp. British psychiatrist David Nutt is the author of new research on prescription trends of cannabis-based products and says it's outrageous people are being denied what he calls life-changing medication for some. Tracy Neal reports.
Professor Nutt says up until last century, cannabis was a medicine.
Cannabis was formally banned under the 1961 UN conventions, and it was said to have no medical value, but it was a medicine, and it actually stayed as a medicine in Britain until 1971.
The long-time campaigner for the use of medical cannabis says reluctance to prescribe is linked to a lack of knowledge. Cannabis became legal medicine in New Zealand in April, but research by the New Zealand Medical Journal published by a New Zealand doctor in June shows 79% of GPs in New Zealand have concerns about prescribing it. Meanwhile, the medical director of the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners, Dr. Brian Betty, says there's still not enough evidence of its benefits.
So if you think about doctors or GPs, they base their prescribing on authorised medication that has quite an evidence base to say it should be used in these circumstances for these reasons. We're not in that position with medicinal cannabis, and I think that's one of the problems we've run into.
But that's not to say medical cannabis doesn't have a place on pharmacy shelves.
There is no doubt in individual circumstance there is benefit to patients, and patients report that, and we know that. But still, we need quality evidence on the best use of medicinal cannabis and where it should be used.
Professor Nutt, who's a firm believer in its merits for treating epilepsy, believes patient experience is a valid form of evidence.
If a parent's life is transformed, if a child's life is transformed by switching from 6 anticonvulsant drugs to medical cannabis so that their child ceases to have seizures, that is powerful evidence. This sort of evidence you will never get from controlled trials.
The New Zealand Drug Foundation has been working for many years to improve patient access to medical cannabis. Executive Director Ross Bell says patients are well ahead of doctors on the subject, but a barrier to it becoming mainstream are the overly complicated systems that control its use.
So the study out of the UK, I think, shows that really clearly. But we've seen the same thing happening in Australia, and right now in New Zealand, we have the same problem. Patients can't access the medicines that they want.
Mr. Bell says concerns linger that use of medical cannabis could lead to the use of recreational cannabis when they are two separate things. A referendum on legalising recreational cannabis will be held at the general election on Saturday the 17th of October. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
Today marks 1 year since the discovery of the body of Mason Pendris in his room at Canterbury University Hall. The 19-year-old lay dead for between 2 and 4 weeks at the Sonoda building before he was found by a friend. Since then, the University and Campus Living, the private company that operates the halls, have rung the changes to ensure students living away from home for the first time are better cared for. But while the family of Mason Pendris have welcomed the changes, they remain deeply disappointed at what they say is the failure of Campus Living to tell them what it has been doing to ensure the same thing does not happen to anyone else's son. Alicia Foon reports.
Anthony Holland says 12 months on, the loss of his 19-year-old stepson is still hard to bear.
Me and the family, and Tree's my partner, we talk about him often. Do I miss my friend? It's just like a line out of that movie, Shawshank Redemption. Do I miss my friend? I miss him a lot every day, every single day.
But the grief this family feels has been compounded by what it says is a failure by Campus Living to keep them informed of the changes it has made to prevent a repeat tragedy. Anthony Holland says the multinational company, which the family chose because of the pastoral care it promised to offer Mason, has not been in touch with them since January. This last meeting 8 months ago was to discuss an independent inquiry that found the company had no staff on site and failed to follow up on the whereabouts of their son.
Not a thing since the independent inquiry with the QC. I've not heard anything since before that. Not a thing. So, hey, ask them why they've not been in touch. That would be interesting.
RNZ put the claim to Campus Living's Australian-based managing director, John Schroeder. He insists it has done enough to support the family and to communicate to them the changes it has brought in.
I believe we have.
Do you believe you had a duty to communicate and check in with Anthony Holland or the family of Mason within the last 6 months?
I won't answer that on this particular call. I won't answer that.
Can you say why not?
I won't answer it. I think I've answered the question. I spoke to, again, for the record, I spoke to Anthony Holland several times, face-to-face, in New Zealand, up to 4 to 6 weeks after Mason was discovered. Our Chief Operating Officer had more communication with him thereafter and tried to communicate with him earlier this year. That's all on the record. I don't propose to go into any much more detail after that.
John Schroeder says between May and July it worked with the university, hiring 8 more staff and 15 more resident assistants.
Placed individual dedicated village managers in each of the properties, monitoring door access, monitoring meal use, working with support staff for monitoring wellbeing signals and the system for students to indicate absences from the halls. And that's all being rolled out at the moment.
But Anthony Holland says while he is happy with the communications he has had with the university and the actions it and Campus Living have taken, the company still had a duty to keep the family up to date with the changes it had introduced.
Just tells you what they think about me and Mason's death. They're really not that concerned. Oh, they're not concerned about me anyway. I'm extremely disappointed I've not heard from them. Not at all, not a thing. Extremely disappointed. There's no contact whatsoever from Campus Living Villages.
John Schroeder says the situation wasn't helped by the university allowing the halls to be used to house first-year students, such as Mason Pendris, when it was only designed to accommodate those in years 3, 4 and 5.
The original design of Sonata was not for undergrads, first-year undergrads. So we've stopped that. We've eliminated it.
So are you saying that if this change was made earlier, this death potentially could have been prevented?
I don't believe you can eliminate all risk. I don't believe you can. The circumstances surrounding Mason, which we have to be mindful of, is still subject to a coronial inquest and coronial inquiry.
Decomposition of the teenager's body made it impossible to determine the cause of death. To this day, Mason's friends and family feel his death has been overshadowed by questions.
There's nothing I can do to change it or bring him back, and as sad as it sounds, we'll never know when or why or how. Do I grieve? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, every day.
In a response to Campus Living's claims that it was the university's decision to house first-year students in a hall intended for older residents, the university says it entered into an agreement with the company to do this. Vice-Chancellor Professor Cheryl Delaray says they have contacted Mason's family and his friends to offer support. She says a cherry tree and plaque have also been dedicated in Mason's memory, and his family have been invited back to visit the memorial site. From January 2021, universities and polytechs face a $100,000 fine if found responsible for the serious harm or death of students in their care. For Checkpoint, ko Elisha Foon, tēnei.
It's 7 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In the United States, the coronavirus death toll has passed 200,000, with an average of 150 people still dying every day. America leads the world with the number of confirmed cases and deaths, as the president continues to downplay its seriousness. As the ABC's Catherine Diss reports, the bleak milestone comes as political manoeuvring continues over filling the vacancy on the Supreme Court.
Thousands of American flags have been planted on the National Mall in the capital to honour the lives lost to the coronavirus.
And these flags are indicative not only of the lives lost, but of the families left behind and suffering.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi toured the memorial to remember the dead and their families. But like much in this country, it became political.
But this was preventable. Not all of it, but much of it. And what could be lost in the future is preventable too, if we embrace science.
Even as the grim milestone of 200,000 deaths approached, the US President Donald Trump continued to downplay its seriousness at a campaign rally last night.
In some states, thousands of people, nobody young,
below the age of 18 like nobody. They have a strong immune system. Who knows? You take your hat off to the young because they have a hell of an immune system, but it affects virtually nobody. It's an amazing thing.
It comes as a bitter political row continues to distract attention away from the deadly crisis to the nation's next Supreme Court Justice.
And that was Catherine Diss reporting. Our travel wings have been clipped with the borders closed for the foreseeable future, but there may be some hope on the horizon. Pennant Yacht Cruises and Expeditions wants to operate bubble expeditions, offering New Zealanders the chance to cruise our owned country and perhaps Australia in the future. The boutique luxury cruise company, which is already operating in parts of Europe and Tahiti, wants an exemption to offer cruises here this summer. Serena Bratton told me her company would love to bring 2 ships to New Zealand waters for the December to March season, using 1 or 2 quarantine options.
One is either you can be at sea for 28 days, making your time from a point, let's say Singapore, through to New Zealand with just the crew on board. The other one is that you could come into an anchorage, say at Auckland, and be anchored for 14 days with no guests on board, just your crew, and undertake the quarantine there.
So would the crew be tested during this period of time? And I mean, how many crew do you need to run two ships?
So on average, we would have around 100 crew on each of the ships. And these ships, one's in Noumea, which is COVID-free, and the other one's actually in Tahiti, and it's been operating as well. So all of our crew get tested. They get PCR tested. We have PCR testing capability and diagnostic capability on board our ships. But in the case of Tahiti, the French government wished to do that, and they undertake that testing. So yes, indeed, it's very important for us that our crew are regularly tested.
So would the crew all be tested prior to departure, and would they be tested again when they were during that quarantine period or anchored off New Zealand?
Yes, so what we do is we work with the health authorities of the particular jurisdiction where we're going. In some cases, they have their own requirements, which says that anybody arriving by air or sea needs to be tested under their legislative ability, whereby, what we say to our guests is that we want our guests and obviously our crew are tested minimum 72 hours beforehand if they're coming from an external, the bubble environment. And this has been very successful. We've operated over the last 2.5 months, over 50 expeditions in various parts of the world with no incidents.
So cruise season or expedition season is December through to March for you, is that right?
Correct. Sometimes we would come in a bit earlier in November, but we're planning for late December through March, yes.
So what are you relying on here? Are you relying on a special exemption from the government, or are you waiting in the hope that there's going to be some change in our border rules?
So firstly, we've been working with Maritime New Zealand, who is the lead agency to oversee the restart of expeditions and cruising in New Zealand. We've been working very closely with them, and they've been working with the cross-border agencies, through Customs, Immigration, Health, Department of Conservation, Ministry of Primary Industries, etc., to try and get the red lights turned green for our style of operation. There appears to be some fairly good progress there, but linked to that is obviously your border opening. And if your border doesn't open, we would then be trying to get approval to come under all of those health guidance and operate just for New Zealanders in New Zealand.
So you say this would just be for New Zealanders. So how many people can you take on board each boat? And it would literally just be New Zealanders taking tours or expeditions around New Zealand. You wouldn't leave our waters, you wouldn't pick up anyone else.
That's correct. And so unless there is a bubble open, let's say for the Trans-Tasman, for the Aussies. But that's the idea. So the La Perouse, she will carry 150 guests, and the Soleil can carry 200 guests. So it's La Perouse, where we would like to do a commitment of around 80 plus days in and around the New Zealand coast, because we've got such, proven operations there with the sub-Antarctics, but also in regional New Zealand cruising. And when we have a look, that over 100,000 Kiwis cruise annually. Now, not a lot of them get opportunity to cruise their own coast, or indeed to take an expedition. And the reason being that most of the time when we're in New Zealand, we're chartered by North American companies. So we see this as a tremendous opportunity for us to create product, number one, for Kiwis, and if we're able to, for the Aussies.
Do you think customers would be keen on this? Because obviously there's been a lot of international media attention focused on cruise ships, a lot bigger than the ones that you're talking about, and they're seen as floating petri dishes, so the press hasn't been great around them. Do you actually think people would have the confidence to book a trip on a boat?
Our evidence is that there is demand. And I think that some of the words that have been bandied around about what cruise ships represent, clearly that has no relevance to the style of operation where we're talking 150 guests. To me, it's a little bit like trying to compare a Gulfstream private jet to an A380 aircraft. So it's very, very different operations.
At the same time, in an infection situation, if someone gets COVID, regardless of whether your ship is only carrying 150 rather than 1,050, it can spread very quickly. What would happen if your boats came here and you were off the coast finishing your isolation period and one of your crew tested positive for COVID? Does that mean all bets are off and that ship's out of action? End of story?
I don't know what the health authority's ruling would be. But clearly, any testing of positive COVID test they are immediately isolated. We have a series of isolation cabins that are put aside for that purpose. The other thing is that also we're new ships, so we aren't old ships. So the whole air conditioning situation on board, we have 100% fresh air coming through all of the cabins. 100% fresh air coming into the public spaces that is then renewed 5 times every hour. This is new technology. It's nothing like what we've seen or heard or what we even can believe that cruising generally represents.
So in that respect, have you done any work on how much you think this could pump into our economy? Because your kind of boutique adventures on a small ship, and would you call into multiple ports, and how much do you reckon that would pump into our economy?
Yes, so I haven't done the exact numbers, but I can do those and come back to you. But if you think about the things that we undertake, all of the bunkering for the ship, all of the fresh and frozen stores for the ship, we become a quarantine-exempt vessel when we come to New Zealand. That means that we buy locally. We're not trying to bring containers in from overseas. So there's a lot of hotel technical stores, fresh, frozen produce. All of that goes into those local markets. And then also where we've got then guests flying in and out of different regional areas, very rarely do they fly in the morning, jump on the ship, get off, say in Dunedin and fly straight home. Normally they'll have, additional touring, accommodation, and so the economic benefit gets spread right throughout the whole community.
So, since we spoke, Serena Bratton did go away and do the sums, and she says bringing a ship here, just one ship for the season, would pump about $4.5 million into the economy. Maritime New Zealand says the maritime border remains closed with only a few specified exceptions, including international fishing and cargo ships. In exceptional circumstances, the DG of Health may grant foreign vessels entry, but they need to demonstrate a humanitarian reason or a compelling need for the ship to be delivered to New Zealand businesses. Now, Maritime New Zealand says at least one cruise ship company, has applied for an exemption to allow a foreign ship to enter New Zealand, and this is going through the Ministry of Health's process, but it won't comment specifically on Ponant's plans. And let's get to your feedback for the 6 o'clock news. Some of you getting in touch already about the potential for cruises around New Zealand. This listener says, regarding New Zealand cruise bubbles, there are literally hundreds of skilled New Zealand seafarers and cruise ship hospitality stag who can't travel overseas to join their normal ships, who could crew these ships around New Zealand over the summer and then offer New Zealand residents cruise ship holidays to the tropics. But they go on to say that Maritime New Zealand has no driver to make sure these jobs go to New Zealanders. Another listener, though, reckons these ships are disease carriers. And Meg has got in touch to say, let's keep our tourist dollars for New Zealand tourism companies. And someone else saying last summer the Explorer Dream cruised around New Zealand, I think 5 times, and the cruises were very popular. The listener says, we loved our cruise just before Christmas. I would definitely do such a cruise again. On the campaign trail, this person says, I find it sickening the way Labor has treated farmers, now throwing $50 million their way today after being exposed last night. Says it all, says Jeff from Queenstown. Another person says how patronising of Judith Collins to talk about Jacinda Ardern as poor wee thing. Just can't resist the temptation after hearing Judith Collins getting emotional, this listener says today, to toss her own words back at her. Poor wee thing.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The latest 3 community cases of COVID-19 sat near a man already known to have the virus on a charter flight from Christchurch to Auckland. The cases are not connected to the main Auckland outbreak, but to a man who was found to have the virus after leaving managed isolation. The Minister of Health, Chris Hipkins, says the man's 2 family members have since tested positive, along with the 3 cases announced today, who are a different family.
They were sort of in the same 2 or 3 rows of the plane, and so. But I don't. My understanding is that they don't necessarily know each other.
The Health Minister, Chris Hipkins. Epidemiologist Michael Baker says the latest cases constitute a new cluster separate to the existing Auckland one. However, the Minister disagrees. The National Party leader Judith Collins is unimpressed by Labor's pledge to help farmers streamline their environmental compliance costs. If elected, Labor is promising an initial $50 million to help farmers and growers as they make their farms greener. But Ms Collins says what farmers need is a government that supports them and lets them get on with their job.
I'm sick to death of listening to giving away money constantly. Actually, you know what? Farmers just need a government that backs them and doesn't bag them every 5 minutes.
Judith Collins. Jacinda Ardern has been asked to explain why there was no mention of Māori interests, rights or issues during last night's televised leaders' debate. The Labour leader says during debates, leaders often only speak to the subject matter that is brought before them. She says she is proud of her party's work to improve Māori outcomes in health and education.
You know, I would welcome the chance to delve a little more deeply into some of those issues. I do think that's where you'll see significant contrasts between Labour and National. I'm very proud of the work we've done to invest in kohanga reo, to increase our te reo teachers in schools, to support whānau ora.
Labour leader Jacinda Ardern. One of the country's newest medicinal cannabis companies says it's too soon to ask New Zealand to vote on reforms to recreational cannabis use. Medical cannabis became legal in New Zealand by prescription in April, but the Tauranga-based firm Equalis says more time is needed for doctors to engage with patients over its use. The company's chief medical officer, Elizabeth Plant, says many people don't know the difference between medicinal and recreational cannabis, and they need to be clear about what they're voting for.
They're not voting for medical cannabis, and I don't believe they're going to get better access to medical cannabis. What they're voting for is the opportunity to buy flower to smoke for recreational purposes or to grow plants for recreational purposes.
The referendum on legalising cannabis will be held alongside next month's general election. The Commerce Commission says ignorance is no excuse when it comes to safety standards for toys. STL Trading Limited and Green Star Holdings Limited have been fined a total of $118,000 for selling toys that posed a choking risk for young children. The Commission's chair, Anna Rawlings, says the fines show children's safety is a top priority.
Even if there are few reported cases of choking, the stakes are very high. This is about the safety of New Zealand children, and those businesses that are supplying toys for children need to take those obligations seriously and make sure that they don't have the potential to cause harm.
Anna Rawlings says the Commission has produced information brochures in multiple languages, but anyone wanting to import goods into New Zealand should know the rules. An environmental group is appealing the Ports of Auckland's plans to dredge the Rangitoto shipping channel. The ports were granted consent to deepen the channel in August. The application drew more than 200 public submissions to the Auckland Council, with only 13 approving the plan. Environmental group Protect Our Gulf says concerns around environmental harm led it to opposing the dredging. Traffic on and near Auckland's Harbour Bridge is light this evening after a reprieve of 2 extra lanes, which reopened this morning. A temporary fix overnight has allowed 6 of the bridge's 8 lanes to be open. This will likely be how the bridge operates for about a month, which is how long the Transport Agency estimates a permanent fix will require. Nearly half of Christchurch's recycling is going to landfill because it's contaminated with waste, including guns and dead animals. During Level 4, when sorting recycling was not possible, the council allowed households to use their yellow recycling bins for general waste. Eco Central's compliance manager Avril Stevenson says in the year before the lockdown, only 3 truckloads of recycling were sent to landfills, but now 42% is being thrown away. She says they've found guns, dead animals, vacuum cleaners, nappies and chainsaws in recycling bins, and disposing of contaminated recycling has cost more than $1 million. It's 5 minutes past 6. Michael Hooper is poised to surpass George Gregan as the longest-serving Wallabies rugby captain after new coach Dave Rennie reappointed him to the role. Hooper led the Wallabies to a World Cup quarter-final exit last year, and speculation was rife he could lose the job under new coach Rennie. Hooper has led the side in 46 of his 99 tests, with only George Gregan on 59 and John Eales on 55 ahead of him. The Wallabies leave Australia on Friday to go into quarantine ahead of the Bledisloe Cup test against the All Blacks in Wellington next month. Meanwhile, All Black centurion Sam Whitelock is passing on the same advice he was given when he first joined the side to this year's newbies. The All Blacks are in camp in Whakatane to prepare for the Wallabies, and Whitelock, who made his debut in 2012, says he well remembers what it was like trying to make an impression.
Everyone said to me, just worry about yourself, and that's the best advice that I got given, and it's the same advice I'd give to any of those 7 new guys. Just be yourself, play the way you've always played, because that's what's got you here. Don't try do something that's not you.
Meanwhile, the Argentina coach Mario Ledesma is confident his COVID-19 ravaged side will recover in time for the Rugby Championship in Australia, although they'll be rusty. More than a dozen players and staff, including Ledesma, have tested positive for coronavirus over the last few weeks. The Denver Nuggets have played their way back into the Western Conference NBA basketball finals with a 114-106 win over the Los Angeles Lakers to record their first win in the best-of-7 series, which the Lakers now lead 2-1. That's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Both the poll and the debate don't really change much in politics, and I don't think anyone's vote will really shift after watching that debate.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
For the numbers 1 to 10, a lot of them in New Zealand sign language look different from American sign language.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mostly fine, however cloud increasing tonight with a few showers, rain developing tomorrow. Waitomo to Kapiti Coast, including central high country. Showers turning to rain, heavy about the Tararua Range and Mount Taranaki today and elsewhere tomorrow. Rain easing from the south tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloud increasing, patchy rain from tonight. Wellington, Wairarapa, Nelson and Marlborough, scattered rain, widespread and heavy about the Tararua Range, clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Norwesterly gales, severe gales for a time today in Wellington, Wairarapa and Marlborough Sounds. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine spells. Evening showers near the coast, possibly heavy, and again tomorrow in Southland. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers turning to rain with thunderstorms about Fiordland tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with showers tonight. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A new previously unknown case of COVID has emerged as likely being the country's first. The Ministry of Health says it has uncovered the find after a Waikato man returned a weak positive test this week that was in fact an old infection. And it's revealed 3 more current cases not connected to the Auckland cluster. That effectively means there is a second cluster in the country. Health correspondent Ron Quinn reports.
February the 28th and the relatively unknown Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, announces New Zealand has become the 48th country in the world to get a case of COVID-19.
Late this afternoon around 4:15 we were formally informed about this COVID-19 test result from a person in their 60s recently returned from Iran. This is our first confirmed case.
But it turns out the woman was not the first case. The Ministry of Health says 1 week earlier, an Italian man visiting family in the Waikato had the disease and passed it on to 5 people he was staying with. But the case was uncovered this week after a man in that Waikato family with a sore throat returned a weak positive test before returning a second negative test. That can happen if someone gets sick after having recovered from COVID and fragments of the virus left in the system come to light. Epidemiologist Michael Baker says it's surprising that it appeared 7 months later.
Given that we're still learning about this virus, we don't know how long the maximum might be that you test positive after an infection.
Investigations revealed the Italian man had blood tests in July that show he had recovered from COVID. He had symptoms when he was in New Zealand. The ministry says he wasn't tested at the time because Italy wasn't considered a country of concern, although we now know the virus was silently transmitting there. Testing in New Zealand was then mainly restricted to those who had contact with China. The Health Minister, Chris Hipkins, says it's likely there were other New Zealanders who had the virus but never knew.
During our lockdown, our level 4 and our level 3 lockdown, there were probably quite a significant number of cases of people who stayed home, they got better, and they never got tested. And that could be quite a significant number.
And the Ministry of Health announced 3 new cases today with no link to the current Auckland cluster. It says they're connected to the chartered managed isolation flight that a man later diagnosed with COVID took. He's the man who was found to have the virus after leaving managed isolation. Chris Hipkins says today's 3 cases were on the same charter flight as the man.
My understanding it's another family group, that they were sitting near to each other on the plane from Christchurch to Auckland, i.e. they were sort of in the same 2 or 3 rows of the plane. And so, my understanding is that they don't necessarily know each other.
There are now 6 cases connected to the flight, and Professor Baker says that's a new cluster completely distinct from the Auckland one.
The big question now is, of course, whether the contact tracing has identified all the people who were potentially exposed. And it sounds like it's well on the way to doing that. And the hope, of course, is that this cluster is very well defined and easy to close it down.
Mr Hipkins disagrees that the 6 cases constitute a cluster. The Ministry of Health says there were 86 people on the same flight as the man in the new cluster. All of them have been contacted, with 63 returning negative tests and the rest waiting for results. And today, strict new rules have been announced for air travel. Board of Airline Representatives Chief Executive Justin Tyumbers says there's now a requirement from the Ministry of Health that international air crew stay at managed isolation hotels.
So for international air crew, that'll mean they'll now need to stay in one of those facilities while they overnight in New Zealand until they return back to the airport for their flight back to their country of origin.
He says a lot of airlines were already carrying out similar isolation procedures themselves. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
It is 6:12 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Ex-Soul MP could have company, lots of it, if the latest One News Colmar Brunton poll is on the money. It puts the party's support at 7%, and that translates to a weighty 9 MPs. Now, we've met the top 5 before, but Checkpoint figured we'd do the rest of the introductions in a segment we're calling 6 to 9. Starting with the rank outsider, contender number 9, Tony Severin. Candidate for Christchurch East, former lab technician and licensed firearms owner. Almost like a fully minted politician, when Checkpoint caught up with Tony, she was moving forward.
but like actually, literally, moving forward. Where are you, Tony?
I'm very fortunate. I'm in Wanaka on the bus tour.
How's it been? Stuck on a bus with David Seymour.
It's been absolutely fantastic, meeting lovely people around the lower South Island, which has been great for me because this is where I originate from, the good deep south.
So is David Seymour lurking around anywhere near you, or can you speak freely, Tony?
I can speak freely, and David's currently in a great meeting here in Wanaka with a whole lot of really nice Wanaka people.
So, the poll, the One News Colmar Brunton poll, what did you think when you saw that, well, potentially on those numbers, you could be in?
Quite excited, actually, and because I've been meeting my fellow candidates and getting to know them along the way, and they're such great people, and I'm just looking forward to actually working with them if the opportunity arises, which looks like it might do for me.
So when you started on this journey, not the one on the bus, but the political journey, did you kind of think, number 9, I'm not really going to get in?
A little bit, yes, because I've been involved with ACT and campaigning for the last 5 campaigns, and I've always been here to get the party vote, and because I've always been also a big believer in freedom of choice and self-responsibility. So, it was really amazing to get to number 9 and be able to promote those values.
Should you be further up the list?
It doesn't really worry me because I'm here as a team player, and we've all got strengths and weaknesses, and just whatever happens, it happens, and that's the best thing about it, because we've all got good things and we've all got bad things, probably.
Oh, what are your bad things?
What's my bad things? Probably I talk too much sometimes.
What's your good thing?
What's my good thing? I really care about what's happening in this COVID time, especially with my staff. I've got quite a few young staff, and just really concerned for their well-being and, the finances for them and where we're going to be moving forward and how we can keep moving forward in the right direction.
So, Tony, what do you think of Jacinda Ardern?
That's a curly question. I think she's done the best that she can possibly do.
What does that mean?
That she's led us through some very tough times, and I think she's done a pretty good job, but we could have done a lot better.
ACT has got 1 MP at the moment, so we'll give you one word to describe that 1 MP, David Seymour. What's your word?
Charismatic.
Charismatic?
Yes.
Time for a quick gear change before this roadie reaches its final destination. When you're not in a bus, what kind of car do you normally drive?
Believe it or not, a Kia Sportage.
Which MP do you like the most outside of David Seymour?
I don't have another MP that I can think of outside of David. Oh, Sir Roger Douglas, when he was an MP.
Chips or chocolate?
Chips.
What's your guilty secret, Tony?
What's my guilty secret? I spend too much money making crafts.
What kind of crafts?
I make wreaths, all sort of different wreaths, like Christmas wreaths, Halloween wreaths, you name it. It's just a guilty secret there to get out there and create.
Do you have a favourite band or musician?
Not one favourite, but I like a mix of really good music, and afraid to say that a lot of my bands that I like are the oldies, like sort of the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac. I'll throw U2 in there.
Like one of those really posh Christmas calendars, every number reveals a surprise. At number 6.
So my name's James McDowell. I am 32 years old. I live in Hamilton with my wife, and we have a 2.5-year-old daughter called Sophia. I am representing the Waikato electorate, but obviously we're focusing on the party vote. I work for my day job is I work for a charity in the mental health and homelessness and disability sectors, so we're quite a large charity, and we have a lot of organisations within that as well. So that's the kind of work I do during the day. I also have a couple of small business projects on the side. I'm a practice manager of my wife's immigration law firm. and a consulting business as well. And then outside of that, I'm actually doing a law degree and politics. So I've got quite a lot on my plate at the moment, but very much looking forward to the election.
So you're Dr. James McDowell. So are you actually a doctor like Dr. Shane?
No, that would be a lot of different things. No, I have a PhD from the management school at Waikato University.
You dislike big government, right? So ACT wants to reduce MPs from 120 to 100. Let's make it easy. Just name three top MPs that you reckon should be gone by lunchtime.
No, I'm not going to go down that track. I think there's far bigger wins in terms of having lower spending and looking at wasteful spending that's actually more important for limiting the size of government.
David Seymour says you're a better option than 90% of the current MPs, so I'm just wondering which ones are you better than?
I think you'd have to ask David that question, but I think he's being very nice.
Dr. James is ACT's immigration spokesperson.
Obviously, at the moment, our borders are pretty much closed, locked down. But I'm wondering, when the opportunity arises again, where do you think the sweet spot is for immigration? How many immigrants should we be taking in every year?
Well, the level of immigration that we had was absolutely fine prior to the lockdown. So I think we can continue that. We absolutely
So what was
need
that around
immigration.
about? Sorry, James, what was that around about, if you think that was about right?
Well, I couldn't give you the exact number off the top of my head. I have a fairly good idea, but I don't want to get it wrong on radio. So, but it's basically a positive, obviously a net positive.
Do you think you sound like a politician?
Well, I'm not a career politician, so it's obviously something, not being a career politician, it's something I'm going to have to, get into and enjoy thoroughly.
Okay, well, here comes the enjoyable bit. This is the bit where we get to know you a little bit better. It's quick fire. So off the top of your head, what kind of car do you drive, James?
A BMW. An old one.
An old one? How old?
It's 2007.
Got any hobbies?
Yeah, I have plenty of hobbies. I love international travel, which obviously is impossible at the moment. I do a lot of photography. I'm also a member of a pistol club, so I like to do a bit of pistol shooting too when I've got time.
Who's the most effective MP outside of ACT MP David Seymour?
Well, that's an interesting question.
What's the answer?
I don't want to pick on anyone. Sorry, I can't give you an answer. I'm just going to say
come
that
on, James.
David's done a great job.
Come on, James. You can't choose him. He's in your party. So name an MP that you look at and think, you're doing a good job.
No, I'll get in trouble. No.
Are you scared about getting in trouble?
No. I just
Who would you be in trouble with, James?
There are plenty of good MPs in Parliament, and there's plenty I respect in there. So that's a safe answer for you.
Who would you get in trouble with, James? Who'd call after you got off this call with me? Who would you be in trouble with?
I'm not sure. We don't have whips in the ACT party, so no, probably no one.
Nipping at James's heels is Karen.
For starters, how do I say your surname, Karen?
So it's pronounced chore, like do your chores.
So Karen Chore.
Yeah.
Got it. What's the most important thing voters should know about you, Karen?
I'm just your everyday New Zealander that's worked hard to get where I'm at. I'm self-employed in the New Zealand-made clothing industry, and I'm raising 4 kids. So I'm just an average New Zealander that's stepped back and watched things going on and got frustrated and decided I wanted to have a voice.
So what frustrates you at the moment?
So for years I've been frustrated watching the numbers of homelessness, child poverty, abuse and mental health rising, and listening to the promises that are made by multiple governments, and nothing seems to change except the name of the department. I grew up through the system and it failed me in so many ways, and I was hoping that it would be getting better. And watching from the outside, it doesn't seem to be getting better. It seems to actually be getting worse.
Remind us what number you are on the list for ACT.
I am number 7, and I'm also the candidate for the Upper Harbour area on the North Shore.
So paint a picture for me, Karen. You're nestled in your lounge chair watching the news, right? And the poll numbers come on. And what goes through your head?
excitement, just thinking that maybe I will have a voice. I spent my whole childhood with people telling me what I couldn't do. And this is really exciting because I'm going out there and I'm going to show people what I can do, because that's what New Zealand should be. It should be a world where we can do anything, and if we want to make a difference, we can. And it's just so exciting to sit here and think I can actually make a difference and help people from what I went through so that they won't go through what I went through. So it's so exciting.
What does your family make of all of this? And who's in your family, your immediate family?
So my husband, I'm actually married to a Cambodian refugee, so he's been an inspiration, and his family's been a huge inspiration to me, showing me that no matter where you come from, what you can actually do with your life. So he's standing behind me and saying, go for it, give it a go. You can make a huge difference when you get there. And I've got 4 children. 2 have moved out of home. They're all grown up and spread their wings, and I've got a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old at home.
Here's some quickfire coming at you just off the top of your head, Karen. Who's the most effective MP outside of ACT?
Outside of ACT? There's a hard one. There's quite a few.
Just one.
If I had to pick, at the moment, the most effective, I think, at the moment is probably Chloe Swarbrick with what she's out there doing for the young people.
Okay, chocolate or chips?
Chocolate.
If you're not a human, what animal would you be?
Koala bear.
What's on your Spotify playlist?
Shania Twain.
That don't impress me much. So
it seems only appropriate ACT's next candidate is number 8. Because he'd be pretty familiar with fencing wire. Although when we catch up with him, he's just managed to navigate Auckland Harbour Bridge and chowed back a roadside burger to celebrate.
Well, I'm Mark Cameron. I'm the ACT candidate for Northland and the rural spokesperson for the party, and a cow cocky from Rurawai.
A cow cocky, you say?
Yes, I am a cow cocky. I milk my own cows. I have 300 cows on the Kaipara Plain.
Do they have names?
Oh, they've got lots of names.
Ones that you can repeat on air?
Some of them I can't share on the radio because they're not very friendly. Some of them are really quite darling. So, yeah, we've got all sorts of names.
Who's Mark Cameron?
We're damnably good people, and restore some pride in rural New Zealand would be the first thing I'd try and do.
Do you think there isn't any pride left in rural New Zealand?
Oh, there's a lot that's gone. Lisa. I've been in meetings in small towns, and they don't allude to the fact that they're dairy farmers for the fear, I suppose, of the vitriolic language or the disdain that they meet in a more urban setting. So, yeah, I think we've got to change that. It's shifting now with the COVID reality, which is great. But why did it take COVID to prove how good we were? There's too many of us taking our own lives. Mental illness in rural New Zealand is rife. And I'd like to be just part of a team of people that, one, celebrate rural people and actually say, hey, look, you've done a damn lot of work that you perhaps haven't had the acknowledgement for, and thanks very much for doing what you do.
So, in your bio on the ACT web page, David Seymour says you're a deep man and of good character. I'm going to give you 15 seconds to prove it. 15 seconds to prove it, Mark.
Yeah, you tell me. You ask me the question, my dear, and I'll do my best to answer it.
Well, are you of good character?
I believe in what I'm doing is a good thing. I think I'm a good character. I believe that helping people is something that maybe I'm better at than perhaps others. And I've suffered terribly in the past, and quite often when you have suffered, you learn the mistakes that you've made and the other mistakes and all the difficulties that others are suffering from. And you level the playing field and say, hey, come on, chappie, I'll come and give you a hand out of this.
Mark, what do you mean when you say you've suffered terribly in the past? Tell us about that.
Oh, look, I was medicated for depression for 3.5 years in my 30s. The harder I worked, the less I felt in control of who I was becoming. So I knew after years and years in the industry that having been in the industry for years and years at that point, I felt less in control of who I am as a person, and I didn't feel any sense of pride. And now I see it in other people, and I'm deeply grieved by that. I want to be part of the machinery or the collection of people that fixes it.
So, Mark, are you feeling, well, on top of things now?
Oh, yeah. I'm fairly buoyant bloke now. I've got a couple of kids that keep me honest and a darling lady who keeps me honest as well. So life's good.
Do you like music?
Love it.
What in particular? And just remember, before you answer, Mark, people are going to judge you on this.
It would be music. Well, one producer is a chap called Hans Zimmer. He does music for Saving Private Ryan or 1917. Music like that. A lot of the music in some of the kids' movies, it's all instrumental.
David Seymour reckons you're a critical thinker, so we're going to put it to the challenge here. All right? You ready?
Go for it. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So, would you rather fight 100 duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck?
Well, that's one of those tongue twisters where the critical thinking, but the horse-sized duck, probably.
And what's your logic with that choice, Mark?
Well, hopefully I've got one weapon, I dispatch the one, and then I don't have all the others to worry about.
Oh, you are a bit of a thinker, aren't you?
So I'll give it a go. I'll probably completely flummox myself with that, and I'll be trying to digest it all the way home. Did I say the right thing? Oh, gracious. Love it.
And that was the ACT candidates 6 through 9, and on current polling, they would be in Parliament. Just before we go, a bit of your feedback on the campaign trail. A lot of you really not happy with Judith Collins using the words poor wee thing in respect to Jacinda Ardern. This listener says she appears to think that disrespectful comments like poor wee thing, smugness and interruption in debates are essential political tools in her armoury. Another Trump model for this country, perhaps? ? And on the subject of medicinal cannabis, this person says, I saw my GP last week. She recommended medicinal cannabis, far too expensive.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The latest 3 community COVID-19 cases announced today sat near a man already known to have the virus on a charter flight from Christchurch to Auckland. Nationals' Judith Collins is unimpressed by Labour's pledge to help farmers streamline environmental and compliance costs, and she's repeated calls for them to be left to get on with their jobs. Nearly half of Christchurch's recycling is going to landfill because it's contaminated with waste, including guns and dead animals. After chaos and gridlock earlier this week, traffic around and on Auckland's Harbour Bridge is light this evening after repairs reopened 2 damaged lanes. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Tipping presents a set he's called Jazz in Difficult Times. Can Simon Morris stand another Kiwi black comedy? Or would he prefer a Home Alone type movie on acid? That is, the movie